Hello and welcome to our talk. What effect does the geology of the surrounding countryside have on your favorite brew? This has always been a debate as to whether the local water supply has influenced our favorite brew, Coors with their Rocky Mountain spring water and British brews coming from Burton-on-Trent. Let's see if we can answer this question. Beer is one of the oldest and most appreciated drinks known to humankind. Researchers from Stanford University have found evidence of the earliest known beer-making operation in a cave in Israel. Chemical remains of beer have been found on fragments on a jar that's more than 4,000 years old. Mesopotamian kings guaranteed its purity, so much so that fraudulent brewers could be put to death. The oldest known evidence of beer, dating to approximately 13,000 years before present, was found at the Raqefet cave in Mount Carmel near Haifa in Israel. Beer is the world's most widely consumed alcoholic drink and is the third most popular drink overall after water and tea. The Natufian culture were the people who occupied this area thousands of years ago. The Natufian people, a group of hunter-gatherers in the eastern Mediterranean, apparently were quite the beer connoisseurs. Researchers believe that the Natufians brewed beer for ritual feasts that venerated the dead. This discovery indicates that making alcohol was not necessarily a result of agricultural surplus production, but it was developed for ritual purposes and spiritual needs. The beer was a thick porridge-like drink consumed through long straws to avoid the barley hulls that tended to float to the surface. The beer was made from bipar, barley bread, which was baked twice and allowed to ferment in a vat. Beer also became popular not only because of the taste and its effects, but because it was healthier to drink than the water of the region, which was often polluted in large cities. Beer's popularity spread through the Mesopotamian and Egyptian world. The gods were thought to have given beer to humanity, and so beer was offered back to them in sacrifice at the temples throughout Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, as elsewhere, women were the first brewers and beer was closely associated with the goddess Hathor. Sumerians loved beer so much they ascribed the creation of it to the gods, and beer plays a prominent role in many of the Sumerian myths. Beer was also used to pay wages and was consumed readily at religious festivals, celebrations, and funeral ceremonies. Beer was associated with good times as a drink, which made one's heart feel light and allowed one to forget one's problems. So I guess not much has changed since ancient times. You might be wondering what geology has to do with brewing beer. And certainly if you're a beer drinker, it's unlikely that you will have come across much mention of geology affecting your drink. However, the scientific evidence on all this gives a much more complex picture. Beer and geology are intimately intertwined. Everyone knows that geologists have a long history with beer and consume it in copious quantities. No good field trip, geologic symposium, or Friday afternoon bull session ends without a refreshing brew or two. With beer, geology has a clear relevance, certainly in brewing history, but one that is usually overlooked. Most people do not realize that the type of beer brewed is highly dependent upon the geology of the area. Think about the regions known for certain beers. The refreshing bitterness of an English pale ale, the clean light taste of a Czech pilsner, or the dark, almost burnt graininess of Irish stout are all tributes to the power of geology. Beer is more than 90% water, and the geology through which the water percolates makes all the difference in the brew. Beer is one of the oldest and most appreciated drinks known to mankind. But brewing beer, not baking bread, could be the reason our ancestors began cultivating grains in the first place. Beer provided essential nutrients and calories, making it a valuable food source. Beer may have been a motivating factor for the original domestication of cereals in some areas. In medieval times, beer was a more trusted drink than simple water. To ancient Egyptians, the Nile was pretty much the beginning and end of their world. It sustained their farms and led them to be one of the most prosperous states of the ancient world. But drinking from it would kill you for sure. Diseases, parasites, and God knows what else lurked just below the surface, ready to make any unsuspecting peasant bleed out from places they didn't even know they had. Thankfully, the gods were pretty cool and gave them the knowledge of brewing. The fermentation process would kill any grossness in the water that sometimes just boiling it wouldn't catch. The ancient Egyptians were the ones to perfect the brewing process, and the light-colored smooth brew is considered by many to be the first proper beer. The quality of alcoholic drinks, especially beer, is defined by 5 factors: the flavor, the alcohol content, the color, the head retention, and the clarity. Typically, beer is comprised of 4 classic ingredients that have gone unchanged for centuries, namely barley, yeast, hops, and water. These factors depend strongly on the quality of the ingredients used. One of the most important is water, and geology strongly influences the chemistry and quality of water. Many breweries use private springs or wells to satisfy their needs, and of course reference the supposed, often secret, water quality or purity in their advertisements, i.e., Rocky Mountain spring water for Coors. However, as with many marketing claims, it's always good to take them with a grain of salt. The water used in brewing today is likely to come from various sources and undergo filtration and treatment processes to ensure consistency and quality. But there's no doubt that Coors aims to evoke the pristine and natural image of the Rocky Mountains in their branding. Natural water contains 4 elements particularly significant for the brewing process: calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. The concentration of these elements in the water depends strongly on the geology of the catchment area and the source rocks of the springs or wells where the water is found. What most people do not realize is that the type of beer brewed is highly dependent upon area geology. Look at the chart showing the various elements found in water from various beer-producing areas in the world. You will notice a great difference of the elemental concentrations in the natural water of the areas. Think about the regions known for certain beers: the refreshing bitterness of an English pale ale, the clean light taste of a Czech pilsner, the dark, almost burnt graininess of Irish stout, are tributes to the power of geology. The brewing process is water intensive. First, malted barley and other cereals are steeped in hot water, a process called mashing. The resulting liquid, called the wort, is then boiled with hops, the female flowers of a member of the cannabis family responsible for the bitter and aromatic components of beer. Last, the concoction is fermented with yeast. Let's look at the natural chemicals in water. The calcium in water stabilizes the enzymes used by the yeast to break down starch and sugar into alcohol. Phosphate for correcting the pH value of the mash, an important factor for the microbial activity necessary during the brewing process. Magnesium has similar effects, although too much magnesium can give the beer a bitter taste. Too high concentrations of sodium and potassium can also have an undesirable laxative effect on the heavy drinker. Other elements like iron or zinc can give the beer a strange metallic flavor or cause it to become cloudy. Today, the brewing world has a plentiful supply of geologic materials that can be added to local waters to reproduce virtually any native source. Home brewers can purchase minerals like calcium carbonate, gypsum, and water crystals, 66% calcium sulfate and 34% magnesium sulfate, that will, in the proper proportions, emulate native waters from anywhere in the world. Ultimately, however, there is no substitute for natural waters, which heavily depend on local geology for their unique characteristics, and the character of the natural water used can have a big impact on the final brew. Sulfate, deriving from evaporite rocks and gypsum, can give the beer a desirable, slightly bitter flavor by supporting the release of oils from hops and reacting with magnesium to produce magnesium sulfate, a bitter tasting salt. Also, water from springs with a high concentration of chloride and sodium from salt deposits can add a salty or even bitter flavor to a beer. However, in the correct proportions, the sweetness of the chloride ion prevails, resulting in the taste of a classic ale. Monks in Burton-on-Trent, England, began brewing beer in the 6th century from well water drawn from the evaporite-rich Permo-Triassic sandstones outside of town. The area around Burton-on-Trent, northwest of London, has a high salt content from the gypsum in the subsurface, and the sulfate enhances the flavor of hops. In fact, the process of adding gypsum to water in order to brew a pale ale is known as Burtonization. At its peak in the 19th century, the Burton area had 30 breweries. The pale ale produced there was stable as a result of the preserving characteristics of the sulfates, allowing the beer to survive shipping, even as far as India. That's where the name India Pale Ale, or IPA, came from. You can thank the gypsum and the geology for that. These waters had a pH of 5 to 5.5, ideal for extracting sugars from malted barley steeped in warm water, an important step known as mashing. Simplified cross-section of the Burton-on-Trent district. Breweries obtain water from both bedrock and superficial deposits. Both are rich in calcium, magnesium, sulfate, and other ions. Porter was first developed in the 18th century London from water high in calcium and carbonates and low in sulfate and chloride. In areas dominated by carbonate rocks, with springs high in calcium and magnesium, the control of the pH of the water and mash is a major problem. The low pH water makes only relatively sweet beers possible. Porter was exported to Ireland where, in 1759, a Dublin brewer named Arthur Guinness began to make a thicker or stouter porter with water from Dublin. His brew became known worldwide as stout. Flowing through 300-million-year-old limestone, the Dublin water is very alkaline and requires even more roasting of the barley, resulting in what is called black malt. Even then, the extraction isn't too good, and this means the beer has a distinctive grainy flavor, with resulting beers that are very dark, even black. This yields the distinctive taste of Guinness and other Irish stouts. By contrast, regions with sandstone formations or metamorphic rocks are characterized by water with a low concentration of dissolved minerals. The lack of the previously mentioned elements in the brewing process results often in a beer with less distinct flavor. To compensate for this disadvantage, the beer has to ferment for longer time, preferably in a dark, cool environment like a lava cave. The names Pils or lager, classic beers from Central Europe, derive from the many caves found in ancient lava flows and used as lager, storage room, for the beer. You can't brew a Pilsner with water from Dublin or a stout in the Pilsen region of the Western Czech Republic. In general, areas with softer water produce lagers and darker ales, while those with harder, more mineral-rich water are more conducive to paler, hoppier ales. After mergers, acquisitions, and changes in the global economy, Burton now has fewer than a dozen breweries. Coors is one of them, but the beer it produces there is unlikely to resemble that brewed from the pure Rocky Mountain spring water from their native Golden, Colorado. Nowadays, many breweries import their water from elsewhere or even use customized water. Thanks to special membranes, undesired elements are filtered out from the natural water and desired elements are added to the brewmaster's recipe. This technology guarantees a tasty beer, but sadly for the geologist, the geological information behind that pint of beer is lost. With the availability of malted barley, hops, and yeast from around the planet, the water is often the only local ingredient in beer. Ultimately, however, there is no substitute for natural waters, which heavily depend on local geology for their unique characteristics, and the character of the natural water used can have a big impact on the final brew. Lagers and ales are the two basic forms of beer. Pils or Pilsner beer is a style of lager. Ales and lagers are differentiated by the yeast used to ferment them. The longer time involved in making lagers is due to the lower temperature that the beer is fermented at, in order to minimize compounds found in ale, giving the lager a cleaner, less fruity taste. Lagering has nothing to do with alcohol content. That only comes from the starting gravity, i.e. the sugar content as measured by specific gravity, of the unfermented wort before the yeast is added. Lagering only began after fermentation was complete. The world's largest brewing corporation is AB InBev. Their worldwide headquarters is located in Leuven, Belgium. Their brand portfolio includes approximately 500 brands as of January 2025. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by pressing the subscribe button below. We are planning to add many more presentations covering a wide variety of science, history, and other enriching subjects. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to make them, and we will do our best to respond. Again, thanks for watching, and please do subscribe.